So this is another reading from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. I'll begin with a chant, but the chapter is going to be chapter 16, and we're going to be on page 332 when we begin. Hridaya Kamala Madhye Rajitam Nirvikalpam Sada Sada Kila Vedati Kameka Swarupam Prakriti Vikriti Shunyam Nityamanandamurtim Vimala Paramahamsam Ramakrishnam Bhajamaha Nirupamamati Sukshmam Nishprapancham Nirhiyam Gagana Sadrisham Isham Sarvabhuta-divasam Triguna-rahita Satchit Brahma-rupam Varenyam Vimala Paramahamsam Ramakrishnam Bhajamaha Vitaritum avatirnam jnana bhakti prashantihi Pranaya galata chittam jiva dukkha sahishnu Drita sahaja samadhim chinmayam komalangam Vimala paramahamsam Ramakrishnam bhajamaha. This is the meditation on Sri Ramakrishna. This knower of Brahman, ever established in his own nature, full of wisdom, self-possessed and self-lighted, eternal, the very image of that Brahman who is pure bliss, shining ceaselessly in the lotus of the heart, one alone and without parts, pure and still. This Ramakrishna, Paramatman Supreme, we adore. Subtle, fine, and luminous, not even the shadow of the gross can ever reach him, for his purity is without parallel. Untouched by Maya's webs of deceit, beyond the dark river of time and desire, vast as the sky, this Supreme Lord, the very essence of Brahman as existence and light. This Ramakrishna, Paramatman Supreme, we adore. Saturated with divine consciousness, his home is in all. He hears every cry. He knows every pain. Under the weight of its compassion, his heart can deny the need of none. Born to raise the world with teachings of knowledge, love, and peace. Born to bring mankind fresh songs of joy. This certain refuge of all, this Ramakrishna, Paramahamsam, the Paramatman Supreme, we adore. So, as you know, I've been reading a little bit at the beginning each time about one of the disciples that was with him at this time. Many of his disciples came to him at the time that M was there and the gospel was being recorded. So I think it gives you a little insight into him if you hear what these disciples, who became later like presidents of the order and everything else, had to say about him when they first came. So this is actually about Swami Saradananda, and it's interesting because we had read before in the festival of Panchavati how he danced, and the first time that Saradananda came was then. On the 26th of November, 1883, Shard arrived at Dakshineswar by boat with two of his friends and found that the master was about to leave for Calcutta to attend the Brahmo festival at Mani Malak's house. Ramakrishna was pleased to see them, so that they could attend the festival. Sharat wrote of the festival. Now remember, Bhavaram is the one that became later Swami Premananda, and we already read a little bit about him. So here's the quote from Saradananda. We saw a wonderful scene. We felt that high waves of heavenly bliss were flowing in the room. All were completely lost in the kirtan. They were laughing, crying, and dancing. Some, unable to control themselves, fell on the ground. Overwhelmed with emotion, others acted like madmen. The master was dancing in the center of the God-intoxicated group, now rhythmically going forward with rapid steps, and again going backward in a similar way. In whichever direction he would move, the people, as if enchanted, would make room for him. The extraordinary tenderness, sweetness, and leonine strength were visible in every limb of the master's body, and his face shone with a divine smile. It was a superb dance. In it there was no artificiality or affectation, no jumping or unnatural gestures or acrobatics, nor was there seen any absence of control. One rather noticed in the master's dancing rhythmic and natural gestures, the movement of limbs. It seemed as if an overflow of grace, bliss, and sweetness surged from within, sometimes slowly and sometimes fast. It was as if the dance was a dynamic physical expression, the surge of the blissful ocean of Brahman, which the master was experiencing within. As he danced this way, sometimes he lost outward consciousness, and sometimes his cloth fell. When that happened, someone would fasten it tightly around his waist. Again, if he saw someone lose normal consciousness, imbued with spiritual emotions, he would touch that person's chest and bring him back to consciousness. We felt a current of divine bliss emanating from the master and spreading in all directions, making it possible for the devotees to see God face to face. Afterward, the master told all of us that one could attain supreme bliss and peace if one could raise the mind from sense objects to God. One day at Dakshineswar, the master was praising Ganesha, the god of success, for his great filial love and absolute purity of heart. Sharat was present in the audience, and he said at once, "Sir, I like the character of Ganesha very much. He is my ideal." "No," immediately corrected the master. He said, "Ganesha is not your ideal. Your ideal is Shiva. In you lie the dormant attributes of Shiva. Always think of yourself as Shiva and me as your Shakti. I am the ultimate repository of all your powers." Now remember, we talked about this, how he knew immediately what the person's real ideal was, and he could see it. And many of them, including Shivananda, said he would first see that ideal when he first saw a person, and then he'd see the devotee after he saw the ideal. So they had this divine insight into people's ishtas. Sharat was tremendously attracted to the master. He began to stay nights at Dakshineswar in order to practice disciplines under his guidance. Once Sharat could not concentrate and reported it to the master. Immediately, the master pressed his index finger between Sharat's eyebrows, and immediately his mind became calm, like the flame of a lamp in a windless place. Once the master sang a Brahmo song to Sharat and told him, "Assimilate any one of these ideas, and you will reach the goal." The song runs this way: "You are my all in all, O Lord, the life of my life, the essence of essence. In the three worlds I have none else but thee to call my own. Thou art my peace, my joy, my hope. Thou my support, my wealth, my glory. Thou my wisdom and my strength. Thou art my home, my place of rest, my dearest friend, my next of kin, my present and my future. Thou, my heaven and salvation. Thou art my scriptures, my commandments. Thou art my ever-gracious Guru. Thou art the spring of my boundless bliss. Thou art the way, and thou art the goal. Thou the adorable one, O Lord. Thou art the mother, tender-hearted. Thou the chastising father. Thou the creator and protector. Thou the helmsman, who dost steer my craft across the sea. So, starting with that, some of those ideas.
Do we know what Swami Brahmananda's idea was?
Well, I don't know, but they saw him dancing with Krishna, so.
Let's see, Shiva, Vivekananda is Shiva.
But actually Vivekananda was initiated with the Rama mantra.
Rama mantra, so Shiva would worship Rama.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't remember reading it that way, but I would go for the Vishnu for Brahmananda, but I don't know. All right, so he's been at a here. The name of this chapter is With the Devotees at Dakshineswar. The master started again for the Panchavati, accompanied by M. No one else was with him. Sri Ramakrishna, with a smile, narrated to him various incidents of the past years of his life. Master, you see, one day I saw a strange figure covering the whole space from the Kali temple to the Panchavati. Do you believe this? M remained silent with wonder. He plucked one or two leaves from the branch in the Panchavati and put them in his pocket. Master, see there? That branch isn't broken. I used to sit under it. I took a young twig from that tree. I have it at home. Master, with a smile. Why? I feel happy whenever I look at it. After all, this is over. The place will be considered very holy. Master, smiling. What kind of holy place? Like Panihati? Almost every year for some time, the Master had been attending the religious festival at Panihati. So if you've visited India, you'll know how it is situated. His room is situated, and then the Panchavati is behind. Still there, holy place. It was evening. Sri Ramakrishna was sitting on a small couch in his room, absorbed in meditation on the Divine Mother. The evening worship in the temple had begun. With the music of gongs and conch shell, M was going to spend the night with the Master. After a time, Sri Ramakrishna asked M to read from the Bhaktamala, a book about the Vaishnava saints. M read, there was a king named Jaimal who loved Krishna with all his heart. He followed with unfailing devotion all the rites and ceremonies associated with the adoration of Krishna, whom he worshipped under the name of Shamala Sundara. That's the beautiful dark one. Completely satisfied with his own ideal deity, he never directed his attention to any other god or goddess. One of the inflexible rules of his devotion was to worship the deity daily until almost midday. Another person who used to do this was Karna. If you read in the Mahabharata, until the sun would come overhead, he would worship. He was a great devotee. Okay. Learning this secret, an enemy king invaded the kingdom during the morning hours. Jaimala's soldiers could not fight without his command, so they watched the invasion silently. Slowly, the enemy surrounded most of the capital, yet Jayamal did not come out of the shrine room. His mother came to him and wept bitterly, trying to persuade the king to fight. He said to her calmly, "Why are you worried? Shamala Sundara gave me this kingdom. What can I do if he's decided to take it away? On the other hand, none will be able to do me harm if he protects me. Our own efforts are all in vain." And actually, in the meantime, Shamala Sundara, the deity himself, had taken the king's horse from its stable and ridden fully armed to the field. Alone he faced the hostile king and alone destroyed his army. Having crushed the enemy forces, the deity returned to the temple and fastened the horse nearby. Jamala, on completing his worship, came out and discovered the horse there, panting and covered with sweat. "Who has been riding my horse?" he demanded. "Who brought it to the temple?" The officers declared they knew nothing about it. In a pensive mood, the king proceeded to the battlefield with his army and there found the enemy, with the exception of their leader, all lying dead. He was staring uncompromisingly at the scene when the enemy king approached, worshipped him, and said, "Please permit me to tell you something. How could I fight? You have a warrior who could conquer the entire world. I do not want your wealth or your kingdom. Indeed, I would gladly give you my own, if you will tell me about that blue warrior, your friend." No sooner did I turn my eyes on him than he cast a spell on my heart and soul. Jayamal then realized it had been none other than Shamala Sundara that had appeared in the battlefield. The enemy king understood too, and he, through his blessings, received Krishna's grace. Master, do you believe all this? Do you believe Krishna rode on that horse and killed Jayamal's enemies? I believe that Jayamal, Krishna's devotee, prayed to him with a yearning heart, but I don't know whether the enemy really saw him coming to the battlefield on a horse. Krishna might have come there riding the horse, but I don't know if they really saw him. Master, with a smile, the book contains nice stories about devotees, but it is one-sided. Also, it abuses those who differ with its views. Master, well, you come here so often, what does it mean? People visit a holy man once at the most, but you come here so often. What is the significance of that? Emma remained silent, and the master gave a reply. Master, could you come here unless you belong to my inner circle? That means you are my own relative, my own people, like father, son, brother, and sister. I do not tell you everything. If I did, would you come here anymore? Once Sukadev went to Janaka to be instructed in the knowledge of Brahman. Janaka said, "First give me my fee." "But," said Sukadev, "why should I give the fee before receiving the instruction?" Janaka laughed and said, "Will you be conscious of guru and disciple after attaining Brahma Jnana? That is why I ask you to give me the fee first." It was night. The moon rose, flooding all the quarters with its silvery light. M was walking alone in the garden of the temple. On one side of the path stood the Panchavati, the Bakul grove, the Nahabat, and the master's room, and on the other side flowed the Ganges, reflecting millions of broken moons in its rippling surface. It really is very beautiful there, and they have these bushes too where I seen gardenias that are like this size growing on it down along the Ganges here. They get beautiful flowers as well. All right. M said to himself, "Can one really see God? The Master says it is possible. He says that if one makes a little effort, then someone comes forward and shows him the way. Well, I am married. I have children. Can one realize God in spite of that?" M reflected a while and continued his soliloquy. "Surely one can. Otherwise, why should the Master say so? Why shouldn't it be possible through the grace of God? Here is the world around me, the sun, moon, stars, living beings, and the 24 cosmic principles. How did they come into existence? Who is their creator? What am I to him? Life indeed is vain without this knowledge. Sri Ramakrishna is certainly the best of men. In all my life, I've not seen another great soul like him. He must have seen God. Otherwise, how could he talk with God day and night, addressing him so intimately as mother? Otherwise, how could he love God so intimately? Such is his love for God that he forgets the outer world. He goes into samadhi and remains like a lifeless thing. Again, in the ecstasy of that love, he laughs and cries and dances and sings." So that's the end of that day's reading. The next one is on Friday, December 14th, 1883. At 9 o'clock in the morning, Sri Ramakrishna was standing on the southwest veranda near the door of his room, with Ramlal by his side. Rakal and Latu were moving about. M arrived and prostrated himself before the Master. Sri Ramakrishna said to him affectionately, "You have come. That is very good. Today is an auspicious day." It was the last day of the Bengali month and the day of the full moon. M was going to spend a few days with the Master, practicing spiritual discipline. The Master had said to him, "If an aspirant practices a little spiritual discipline, then someone comes forward to help him." I think this is very true because, people often say, well, how can I find my guru and all this? But if you're really sincere, you will find the right person. They will come before you. You'll be sent to them. So they do come to help. The Master had said to M, "You should not eat every day at the guest house of the Kali temple. The guest house is intended to supply free food to monks and destitutes. Bring your own food with you. Bring your cook." M had accordingly done so. The Master arranged a little place for the man to cook, and he asked Ramlal to speak to the milkman about milk. A little later, Ramlal began to read from the Adhyatma Ramayana. The Master and M listened while he read. Ramlal was his brother, so I think you probably know that. Rama had married Sita after breaking the great bow of Shiva. On the way to Ayodhya with his bride, Rama had been confronted by the warrior sage Parashurama Rama, who was about to make trouble for him. Parashurama threw a bow at Rama and challenged him to string it. Dasaratha, Rama's father, was seized with fear. With a smile, Rama took the bow in his left hand and strung it. Then, twanging the bowstring, he fixed an arrow and asked Parashurama where to shoot it. That curbed the pride of the warrior sage. Prostrating himself before Rama, Parashurama worshipped him as the supreme Brahman. there's a story in the Mahabharata about him and Karna, because Karna wanted to have Parashurama as his guru, but Parashurama would only accept Brahman students. And one time he was having a nap with his head on the thigh of Karna, and this big, terrible beetle came and bit him, and he didn't move because he didn't want to disturb his guru. And then when Parashurama woke up, he saw that, and he said, that he couldn't accept him as a disciple because he obviously wasn't a Brahmana, because a Brahmana would have moved. But he was a Kshatriya, so he had great forbearance, and he didn't, so anyway. That's what it sounds like. As Sri Ramakrishna listened to Parashurama's hymn, he went into a spiritual mood and now and then chanted the name of Rama in his melodious voice. Then the master asked Ramlal to read from the Guhaka. Ramlal read, Guhaka, the pariah, the chief of the untouchables, and an intimate friend of Rama, was an intimate friend of Rama. When Rama, Sita, and Lakshmana were going into the forest to redeem Dasaratha's pledge, Guhaka ferried them across the river. Rama embraced Guhaka tenderly and told him he was going to spend 14 years in exile, wearing the bark of the trees and eating herbs, fruits, and roots that grew in the woods. He promised to visit Guhaka again on his way back to Ayodhya after the period of exile was over. The pariah king waited patiently, but when the 14th year had run out and Rama had not returned, Guhaka lighted a funeral pyre. He was on the point of entering it when Hanuman arrived as Rama's messenger. In a celestial chariot, Rama and Sita soon appeared, and Guhaka's joy was unbounded. After the midday meal, Sri Ramakrishna lay down on his bed to rest. M was seated on the floor. Presently, Dr. Shama and a few devotees arrived. The master sat on the bed and began to converse with them. Master, it is by no means necessary for a man always to be engaged in his duties. Actions drop away when one realizes God, as the flower drops of itself when the fruit appears. He who has realized God no longer performs religious duties such as the sandhya. In his case, the sandhya merges in the Gayatri. When that happens, it's enough for a person to repeat just the Gayatri mantra. Then the Gayatri merges in Om. After that, one no longer chants even the Gayatri. It's enough then to simply chant Om. How long should a man practice such devotions as the sandhya? As long as he does not feel the thrill in his body and shed tears of joy while repeating the name of Rama or of Hari. People worship God to win money or lawsuit. That's not good. A devotee. We find everyone strives after money. Even Keshav Sen married his daughter to a prince. Master, Keshav's case is quite different. God provides everything for a genuine devotee, even without his making any effort. The son of a real king gets his monthly allowance. I'm not talking of lawyers and men of that sort who go through suffering in order to earn money, who become the slave of others to that end. I'm speaking of a real prince. A true devotee has no desire. He does not care for money. Money comes to him of itself. The Gita describes such a devotee as content, with what comes to him without effort. A good Brahmin, without any personal motive, can accept food even from the house of an untouchable. He does not desire it. It comes of its own accord. A devotee. Sir, how should one live in the world? Master. Live in the world as a mudfish lives in the mud. One develops love of God by going away from the world into solitude now and then and meditating on God. After that, one can live in the world unattached. The mud is there, and the fish has to live in it, but its body is not stained by the mud. Such a man can lead the householder life in a spirit of detachment. The master noticed that M was listening to his words with great attention. M often, I think, felt bad because he was married. When Sri Ramakrishna first met him, he asked about him, and he said that he was married, and Sri Ramakrishna said, oh dear, like that. And that really, struck him. So he's always trying to make sure that he also is going to realize God, even though, see how close he is to the master. The master looked at M. One can realize God if one feels intense dispassion for worldly things. A man with such dispassion feels that the world is like a forest on fire. He regards his wife and children as a deep well. If he really feels that kind of dispassion, he renounces his home and family. It's not enough for him to live in the world in the spirit of detachment. Woman and gold alone is Maya. If Maya is once recognized, it feels ashamed of itself, and it takes to flight. A man put on a tiger skin and tried to frighten another man, but the latter said, I've recognized you. You are our Hari. At that, the man dressed in the skin went away smiling to frighten somebody else. All women are embodiments of Shakti. It is the primal power that has become woman and appears to us in the form of woman. It is said in the Ramayana that Narada and others praised Rama, saying, O Rama, thou alone art all that we see as male, and Sita is all that we see as female. Thou art Indra, and Sita is Indrani. Thou art Shiva, and Sita is Shivani. Thou art man, Sita is woman. What more need I say? Thou alone dost exist where there is a male, and Sita where there is a female. To the devotees, one cannot renounce by mere wish. There is prarabdha karma, inherited tendencies, and the like. Once a yogi said to a king, live with me in the forest and think of God. The king replied, that I cannot very well do. I could live with you, but I still have the desire for enjoyment. If I live in this forest, perhaps I shall create a kingdom even here. I still have desires. Natabar Panja used to look after his cows in the garden during his boyhood. He had many desires. Hence he established a castor oil family and factory and earned a great deal of money. He has a prosperous business at Alam Bazar. There is one sect that prescribes spiritual discipline in the company with women. I was once taken to the women belonging to the Kartabhaja sect. They all sat about me. I addressed them as mother. At that, they whispered among themselves, he is still a Pravrajika. He does not know the way. According to that sect, the Pravrajika is the beginner. Then comes the Sadhaka, the struggling aspirant, and last of all, the Siddha of the Siddha, the supremely perfect. A woman walked over to Vaishnavcharan and sat near him. Asked about it, he said, she feels just like a young girl. One quickly strays from the religious path by looking on a woman as wife, but to regard her as a mother is a pure attitude. Some of the devotees took leave of the master, saying that they were going to visit the temple of Kali and several of other temples. M went to walk alone in the Panchavati and other places in the temple garden. He thought about the master's assurance that God can be easily realized and about his exhortation to lead the life of intense renunciation, and his saying that Maya, when recognized, takes to flight. M used to go home and then he'd write down all these different memories. They still have those, they're all disjointed. It's not in the form of the gospel, but many of the things that he wrote are still there. At 3:30 in the afternoon, M again entered the master's room and sat on the floor. A teacher from the Bhaktan Institute had come with several students to pay a visit to Sri Ramakrishna. They were conversing together. Now and then the teacher asked a question. The conversation was about the worship of images. Master to the teacher, what is wrong with image worship? The Vedanta says that Brahman manifests itself where there is existence, light, and love. Therefore, nothing exists but Brahman. How long do small girls play with their dolls? As long as they are not married and do not live with their husbands. After marriage, they put the dolls away in a box. What further need is there of worshiping the image after the vision of God? The master glanced at M and said, one attains God when one feels yearning for him. An intense restlessness is needed. Through it, the whole mind goes to God. A man had a daughter who became a widow when she was very young. She'd never known her husband. She noticed the husbands of other girls and said one day to her father, where is my husband? The father replied, Govinda, which is the name of Krishna, is your husband. He will come if you call him. At these words, the girl went to her room, closed the door, and cried to Govinda, saying, O Govinda, come to me. Show yourself to me. Why don't you come? God could not resist the girl's piteous cries, and he appeared before her. One must have childlike faith and the intense yearning that a child feels to see its mother. That yearning is like the red sky in the east at dawn. After such a sky, the sun must rise. Immediately after that yearning, one sees God. Let me tell you a story of a boy named Jatila. He used to walk to school through the woods, and the journey frightened him. One day he told his mother of his fear, and she replied, why should you be afraid? Call Madhusudana. Mother asked the boy, who is Madhusudana? The mother said, he is your elder brother. That's another name for Krishna, Madhusudana. One day after this, when the boy again felt afraid in the woods, he cried out, oh, brother Madhusudana. But there was no response. He began to weep out loud. Where are you, brother Madhusudana? Come to me, I'm afraid. Then God could no longer stay away. He appeared before the boy and said, here I am. Why are you frightened? And so saying, he took the boy out of the woods and showed him the way to school. When he took leave of the boy, God said, I will come whenever you call on me. Do not be afraid. One must have faith of a child, this yearning. A Brahmin used to worship his family deity daily with food offerings. One day he had to go away on business. As he was about to leave the house, he said to his young son, give the offering to the deity today. See that God is fed. The boy offered food in the shrine, but the image remained silent on the altar. It would neither talk nor eat. The boy waited a long time, but the image didn't move. But the boy firmly believed that God would come down from his throne, sit on the floor, and partake of the food. Again and again he prayed to the deity, saying, "O Lord, come down and eat the food. It is already very late, and I can't sit here any longer." But the image didn't utter a word. The boy burst into tears and cried, "O Lord, my father asked me to feed you. Why won't you come down? Why won't you eat from my hands?" The boy wept for some time with a longing soul. At last the deity smilingly came down from the altar, sat before the meal, and ate it. After feeding the deity, the boy came out of the shrine room. His relatives said, "The worship is over. Now bring away the offering." "Yes," said the boy, "the worship is over, but God has eaten everything." "How can that be?" said the relatives. The boy replied innocently, "Why, God has eaten the food." They entered into the shrine and were speechless with wonder to see that the deity had really eaten every bit of the offering. Late in the afternoon, Sri Ramakrishna was talking to M. They were standing on the south side of the Nahabat. Since it was winter, the master was wrapped in a woolen shawl. "Master, where will you sleep? In the hut in the Panchavati?" M. "Won't they let me have the room in the upper floor of the Nahabat?" M selected the Nahabat because he had a poetic temperament. From there he could see the sky, the Ganges, the moonlight, and the flowers in the garden. "Master, oh, they'll let you have it, but I suggest that the Panchavati, because so much contemplation and meditation have been practiced there, and the name of God has been chanted there so often." It was evening. Incense was burning in the master's room. He was sitting on a small couch, absorbed in meditation. M was sitting on the floor with Latu, Rakhal, and Ramlal. The master said to M, "The sum and substance of the whole thing is to cultivate love for God and devotion." At Sri Ramakrishna's request, Ramlal sang a few songs, the master himself singing the first line of each. Ramlal sang, "Oh, what a vision I have beheld in Keshav Bharati's hut. Gora, in all his matchless grace, shedding tears in thousands of streams. Like a mad elephant, he dances in ecstasy and sings, drunk with an overwhelming love." Then he sang, "Though I am loath to grant salvation, I am never loath to grant salvation. I hesitate, indeed, to grant pure love. Whoever wins pure love surpasses all. He is adored by men. He triumphs over the three worlds." Master said to Ramlal, "Sing that one, Gaura and Nityai, the Blessed Brothers." Ramlal began to sing, and the master joined in with him. "Gaura and Nityai, Blessed Brothers, I have heard how kind you are, and therefore I've come to you. When I visited Benares, Shiva, the Lord of Kashi, told me of the Parabrahman's birth as a man in Mother Sachi's home. O Brahman, thee I recognize. Many a sadhu have I seen, but never one so kind as you. Once at Braja you were born as Kanai and Balai, his brother. Now once more in Nadia, as Gaur and Nityai do you appear, hiding the shapes that you once wore. In Braja's pastures running freely, once you frolicked, now for play you roll on the ground in Nadia, chanting aloud Lord Hari's name. Laughing, shouting, once you played at Braja with your cowherd friends, and now you chant Lord Hari's name. O Gaur, how cleverly you hide the dark blue form you once wore at Braja, but your slanting eyes betray you. Through the blessings of your name, the sinner is set free, they say, and so my soul is filled with hope. Now with eager heart I hasten to your feet. Lord, I implore you, keep me safe within their shadow. You redeemed Jagai and Madai, wretched sinners though they were. I pray to you, do the same for me. I have heard that you embrace all men as brothers, even the outcast, whispering in the ears of all Lord Hari's life-renewing name. Late at night, M sat alone in the Nahabat. The sky, the river, the garden, the steeples of the temple, the trees and the Panchavati were flooded with moonlight. Deep silence reigned everywhere, broken only by the melodious murmuring of the Ganges. M was meditating on Sri Ramakrishna. At 3 o'clock in the morning, M left his seat. He proceeded toward the Panchavati, as Sri Ramakrishna has suggested. He did not care for the Nahabat anymore and resolved to stay in the hut in the Panchavati. Suddenly he heard a distant sound, as if someone were wailing piteously, "Oh, where art thou, brother Madhusudana?" The light of the full moon streamed through the thick foliage of the Panchavati, and as he proceeded, he saw at a distance one of the master's disciples sitting alone in the grove, helplessly crying, "Oh, where art thou, brother Madhusudana?" Silently, M watched him. M does a beautiful descriptive job of, describing all the places there where Sri Ramakrishna was in his room and going from one place to the other. You get, especially if you've seen them, you get a real picture of the whole thing. Saturday, December 15th, 1883. M had been staying at Dakshineswar with Sri Ramakrishna. The master was sitting in his room listening to the life of Prahlada, which Latu and Harish were also in the room, and Hazra was on the veranda. Latu and Harish were also in the room, and Hazra Krishna went in ecstatic mood. Hiranya, that actually means golden pillow, so I don't know how he got that name. I've often wondered. Hiranyakashipu, the king of the demons and father of Prahlada, had put his son to endless torture to divert the boy's mind to the love of God. But through divine grace, all the king's attempts to kill Prahlada were ineffective. At last God appeared, assuming the form of Narasimha, the man-lion, and killed Hiranyakashipu. The gods were frightened at the rage and roaring of the man-lion and thought that the destruction of the world was imminent. They sent Prahlada to pacify the deity. The boy sang a hymn to him in words of love, and the man-lion, moved by affection, licked Prahlada's body. Still in an ecstatic mood, the master said, what love of the devotee, what love for the devotee. The master went into deep samadhi. He sat there motionless. A teardrop could be seen at the corners of each of his eyes. The master came down to the plane of the sense world and spoke to M, expressing his abhorrence for those who, practicing spiritual discipline, enjoyed sex life. Master, aren't you ashamed of yourself? You have children, and still you enjoy intercourse with your wife. Don't you hate yourself for leading an animal life? Don't you hate yourself for dallying with a body which contains only blood, phlegm, filth, and which consists of such impure ingredients as intestines, bile, flesh, and bone? Aren't you ashamed of yourself? M sat there hanging his head in shame. Master, a man significant. He who is handy regards a dream, chants his names, and he began to dance the master and read about help by smiles. Hey, sand and sugar. The side takes the sugar, leaving aside the sand. He takes only the essence. Vaishnavcharan, the musician, arrived and sang a few devotional songs. M spent the night in the Nahavat. Sunday, December 16th, 1883. Sri Ramakrishna was seated with M on the semicircular porch of his room about 10 o'clock in the morning. The fragrance of gardenias, jasmine, oleander, roses, and other flowers filled the air. The master was singing, looking at M. Thou must save me, O Mother. Unto thee I come for refuge. Helpless as a bird imprisoned in a cage, I have done innumerable wrongs, and aimlessly I roam about, misled by Maya's spell, bereft of wisdom's light, comfortless as a mother cow whose calf has wandered away. Master, but why? Why should I live like a bird imprisoned in a cage? Why, for shame. As the Master said these words, he went into an ecstatic mood. His body became motionless and his mind stopped functioning. Tears streamed down his cheeks. After a while he said, "O Mother, make me like Sita, completely forgetful of everything, body and limbs, totally unconscious of hands, feet, and sense organs. Only the one thought in her mind, where is Rama?" Was the Master inspired by the ideal of Sita to teach M the yearning that a devotee should feel for God? Sita's very life was centered in Rama. Completely absorbed in the thought of Rama, Sita forgot even the body, which is so dear to all. I think I will end with that. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is he still the same.